history makes laws and laws make history. In order to understand this, let's study the Pitt's India Act of 1784. The Pitt's India Act of 1784 not only brought about fundamental changes in home, that is in England, but it also impacted the functioning of the East India Company back in India. So we all know that in England we had the English Parliament and Crown giving a charter to the East India Company, and the East India Company had a court of directors. There were 24 court of directors who used to appoint, so all the company's servants and officials, and servants, right? So we used to have governor to carry out their commercial functions. So initially we see that English Parliament and Crown gave a charter which formed the basis on which the court of directors used to appoint companies, officials and servants to carry out commercial functions. Now over here, the British Parliament and Crown used to provide Royal Army as well. So Royal Army, the British Army, was provided to the company officials and servants for a charge in order to protect their commercial interest, especially during the time period of Carnatic Wars. So what happened was, over a period of time, the company's officials and servants, they made use of Royal Army to realize some form of territorial possessions. For example, the Battle of Plassey was won by Robert Clive. Robert Clive was a East India Company official. He was an accountant. But if you talk about Battle of Buxar, which was won by Sir Hector Munro, he was Commander-in-Chief of the Royal Army which belonged to British Parliament and Crown. And therefore, in the entire decade of 1770s, when the company official governor was Warren Hastings, when he carried out warfare in 1774, there was Rohilla War. 1775, he acquired the territory of Raja Chait Singh of Banaras. 1776 till 1782, there was the first Anglo-Maratha War. Then there was the Anglo-Mysore War of 1780s. In fact, in 1780s, the East India Company found itself at war with almost all the native princely states. Therefore, the Royal Army became a chief instrument for the company official, especially the governor, to bring about larger territorial gains. In 1781, a committee was formed, a select committee, to look into the causes of these wars. The select committee pointed out that now this company, especially after 1772, when the company had declared political control, we see that the company now performed the military functions, revenue functions, as well as civil functions. Isn't it? For example, when we talk about Lord Warren Hastings was carrying out military functions, was with the help of Royal Army. When he had declaring war with the Rohillas, with the Maharaja Chait Singh, revenue functions, when he introduced quinquennial settlement, annual settlement, and also civil functions, whereby he introduced all forms of administrative reforms, establishing Faujdari Adalat, Sadr Nizamat Adalat. So now, after the decade of 1770s, the company came to perform military, revenue, civil, as well as commercial functions. Now, the Pitt's India Act is important because what it did was, it separated these three functions, the military, civil, and revenue functions, from that of commercial functions. William Pitt, the younger, who was the youngest prime minister, upheld that because the company's official and servants, they won those territories with the help of Royal Army. Therefore, the military, revenue and civil functions were henceforth to be superintended, were to be controlled, were to be regulated by a separate body, a body that was called as the Board of Control. So what the Pitt's India Act did, it established a 6 members body named as the Board of Control, who was to comprise of a Secretary of State, an Exchequer, Chancellor of Exchequer, and there were councillors. So the 6 member Board of Control was henceforth to look into the military, revenue, and civil functions of the company, and the commercial functions were still to be continued by the Court of Directors because the East India Company enjoyed the charter. And all the territories which were gained with the help of Royal Army were henceforth to be called as British possessions in India. Now this is the title of the Pitt's India Act of 1784, which stated that for better regulation and management of the affairs of East India Company and the British possessions in India. Now in order to further improvise the nature of functioning in India, the Pitt's India Act, it also stated that henceforth the governor, who was made the Governor General, we already know that the Regulating Act of 1773 had made the Governor of Bengal the Governor General. That means the Governor General could superintend the Governor of Madras as well as Governor of Bombay. So this Pitt's India Act of 1784 was a further development over the Regulating Act of 1773, because now the Pitt's India Act, it made this Governor General also the Commander-in-Chief. That is, now the army was to be under Governor General of Bengal. That is why in 1786, the successor to Lord Warren Hastings, would be Lord Cornwallis. Now Lord Cornwallis was an army man. He was the Army General, British Army General. This was only possible because Pitt's India Act of 1784 made the Governor General also the leader of the army. So now what we see, the Governor General in India, he subsumed the governors of Madras and Bombay. He carried out military, revenue, civil and commercial functions. The Governor General was appointed by the Court of Directors, but there was an exception, that while appointing the Governor Generals and other governors, the Crown permission was required by the Court of Directors. So effectively, the Governor General continued to be appointed by the Court of Directors, and the Governor General used to submit all records to the Court of Directors, and over here the military, revenue and civil functions were to be submitted to the Board of Controls, whose recommendation was binding on the Court of Directors. So with respect to commercial functions, the Court of Directors had an autonomy, but when it talked about military, revenue and civil functions, the Board of Control, it regulated the Court of Directors. So the Pitt's India Act was an important event. It strengthened the Governor General by making him the head of the army and also subsuming the 3 governors, the other 2 governors, the Governor of Madras and Governor of Bombay. And now the Governor General, his number of councillors were also reduced. Now we all remember that prior to this, the Regulating Act of 1773 had introduced 4 councillors. So the Governor General, he could always be reduced to minorities if there were 3 councillors who favored one point of view. But now the Governor General was given 3 councillors. And out of these 3 councillors, the Governor General also had a veto power. So in the 1784 Pitt's India Act, not only the functions were divided between the military, revenue, civil and commercial, creating 2 masters for the Governor General, that is Board of Control and the Court of Directors. The members in council were reduced to 3, thereby further strengthening the Governor General's control. The army was brought under the control of Governor General, and there was a further Amendment Act that was introduced in 1786, which allowed the Governor General to also overrule that of the councillor in extraordinary circumstances. Now look at the impact of the Pitt's India Act of 1784. The Pitt's India Act of 1784 led to strengthening of the position of Governor General, because now Governor General had two masters, the Board of Control and Court of Directors. He could play one against another. The Board of Control was ineffective because the Court of Directors, it continued to appoint all the company servants. You appreciate that only via the Charter Act of 1853 that competitive examinations will be introduced, via which company servants would be appointed. Prior to that, all the company servants and officials were appointed as patronage of the Court of Directors. So the Pitt's India Act of 1784 is important for four major provisions. First was establishment of Board of Control comprising of 6 members to regulate, operate, superintend the military, revenue and civil functions of the company. Second, to subsume all other governors to Governor General, who also became the Commander-in-Chief. Third, to reduce the number of councillors from 4 to 3. And fourth, and the most important, is to lay down a policy so that the Governor General does not indulge into warfare with the native princely states.